Hi, I'm Michael from Fan Eye Sports, and welcome to My Sober Thought. Recently, I conducted a Twitter vote on which topic I should focus on next, and I have to say it was surprisingly not close, as doping in the UFC took a commanding lead over the NCAA. So without further ado, let's talk about doping. Doping is obviously the taking of substances for a competitive advantage. Doping has become a major issue in sports as many athletes have been getting caught taking illegal substances just to gain an advantage. Just recently, an investigation had found state-sponsored doping in Russia. Basically, this led to 68 members of the Russian Olympic team being banned from participating in the 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio, and there may be more. Basically is the operative word because it's a really complicated process and it makes my head hurt just thinking about it. However, that is not where the focus of this sober thought will be on, as mentioned earlier. Doping in Russia is a topic that seems distant and comfortable, which to be honest, seems hypocritical to be critical on just Russia when there are examples in North America that will do just fine. Case in point, the UFC. Zuffa recently sold the UFC for just a measly $4 billion. Oh my. But to say the UFC has its problems is an understatement. Besides the fact that MMA is a grueling sport and doesn't pay its athletes nearly enough in my humble opinion, which is another video of itself, the UFC might be on the cusp of a drug problem. When injuries don't derail a big fight, doping does. Remember that correlation because we're going to get to that. Just in UFC 200 alone, we had one fight be completely changed as Jon Jones tested positive for estrogen blockers in his system, and we had one fight tainted because Brock Lesnar failed 2 drug tests, one on June 28th and another one on the night of UFC 200. Oh my. It should be noted that right now the substance is unidentified, but it's been widely reported that it was the same estrogen blockers that Jon Jones got caught for. This could be an aberration or an anomaly. However, there's evidence to suggest that the UFC and MMA have not only had this problem now, but have had this problem for quite some time. Let me explain. For what is known, the UFC is not Russia. They don't manipulate blood samples or urine samples. In fact, the UFC is known for having some of the most strictest drug testing in North America. For time reasons, I won't delve into the whole process, but basically USADA does their drug testing and can ask for samples at any time, any place. Case in point, Brock Lesnar. Before his fight with Mark Hunt, Brock Lesnar actually had 8 clean drug results before his failed drug tests. However, the UFC only started cracking down on drug testing at the start of 2015 due to many people both on and off record saying that a large majority of fighters are taking something. As a result, a lot of those fighters have been getting caught doing something that may be giving fighters a competitive advantage. These names include Anderson Silva, Hector Lombard, Antonio Bigfoot Silva, Jon Jones, Brock Lesnar, etc. In other words, it looks like those people who were saying that a lot of fighters have been on something are now staring back at the UFC saying, I told you so. Now, what I don't want to do is excuse doping to gain a competitive advantage. These fighters cheated and it's been proven that these substances were in their system. Unless there is some conspiracy going on, these fighters got caught and deserve the punishment that they have gotten or are getting because the fighters that are clean and follow rules shouldn't have to suffer. I also don't want to scold drug testing because it's obviously needed, but I need to stress why sports leagues test. Without getting too personal about this, I'm straight edge, and I think drug testing should be strict as humanly possible because drugs are bad for your body. Underline, bad for your body. This is where I think a lot of people have been missing the boat on doping and why there's a WADA in the first place. They are there to protect an athlete from themselves and make sure athletes don't die prematurely from complications to drug abuse in the name of winning. Drug abuse is the problem. Thus, they put rules in place to make sure that those who are clean and follow the rules are celebrated while those who do not are disciplined. Does that mean that they make sure everyone is on a level playing field? Absolutely, and that is needed. But it isn't about the level playing field as much as it's about safety. Bad analogy alert, but if the level playing field argument is the only argument, then protein powders and vitamin supplements would be banned too, because fact is, eating healthy does the job those supplements and powders do. It just takes longer to gain those results without the vitamins and the protein. Doesn't that last line sound ridiculous? If you answered yes, then you are absolutely correct. Why? Because protein and vitamins are healthy for you. But the fact is, if there was 2 people who work out and person A only ate fruits, veggies, and quality meats, while person B does all of that and then uses vitamin supplements as well as protein powder, is that a level playing field? Hell no. But neither person A or B is doing anything wrong because both people are doing healthy things. Doping is taking dangerous substances and abusing them for a competitive advantage, which is simply not healthy. The level playing field argument comes into play when there is a person who throws safety to the wind and decides to cheat to win because they think everyone else is clean or believe everyone else is doing the same thing. That needs to be stopped, because if they are not disciplined then and there, then they will continue to do bad things to their body and hurt themselves, or worse, ... In the case of the UFC, this has been going on, but most of it is to gain a competitive advantage in the recovery aspect of the sport, and that's really thrown a wrench in the whole safety aspect of the anti-doping campaign, because a fighter's schedule is freaking grueling. I love the sport, but training for a fighter leading up to a fight is ludicrous. These guys train a lot to the point where you wonder if these guys can physically even get to fighting shape for their bout. About a quarter of the time, the answer to that question is no, and another quarter of that time, the answer to the question is yes, but you might need drugs. I mean, let's look at some cases. In the case of Anderson Silva, he was a 39-year-old who broke his leg and fought a year and a month later. Who knows a 39-year-old who comes back a year after breaking his leg? John Jones had hurt his foot 2.5 months before he was supposed to fight Dan Cormier at UFC 200 because he was the main event in UFC 197 against Ovince St. Preux. While Jones said he was fine, do you know anyone who can fight twice within the span of 2.5 months? At the time, many of these people were saying that for both fighters to recover in that amount of time is unbelievable, and maybe unbelievable was the right word. There's no excuse for doping because it's bad for you, but when you really put it into perspective and add that these fighters train 2 or 3 times a day, then you see why fighters think they have to do it. Honestly, they do not, and to be fair, the UFC in the form of Dana White simply asks the fighter if they can fight, and the fighter can say yes or no. But when Dana White asks a fighter and gets a no from them, he is not afraid to throw that fighter under a bus.
And basically said that Aldo's rib is too painful and he will not be fighting. So Chad Mendes now will fight Conor McGregor for the interim belt.
Why are you making this the fight for the interim belt, Mendes and McGregor?
Well, you know, Jose Aldo's pulled out of 5 title fights.
Yeah, how about this? How about he sits down? When he and I talk, he says, "I got to sit down and talk to my coaches." His coach Greg Jackson says, "There's no way you take this fight. This fight. You don't take this fight on 8 days' notice. It would be the biggest mistake of your entire career." Wow. Chael Sonnen's a 185-pounder who wants to move up to 205, who hasn't trained a day for this fight, and the fight's in 8 days, yet he says he'll fly here tonight to fight the supposed pound-for-pound third-best fighter in the world. And the list goes on, the world champion, and you have so much, I mean, how much faith do you have in your champion and your guy?
When things like that happen, then you understand why a fighter feels like he's backed into a corner sometimes. Again, the UFC does their best to deter athletes from doping and drugs. Drug testing is strict in the UFC, and that's commendable, but drug testing is not the only thing the UFC can do about doping. The UFC needs to ask themselves these questions. Why are athletes doping despite our thorough testing? Is our schedule too tough for the clean athlete? And finally, if our schedule is too tough, what can we do about the balance between the business side and the safety side of the sport? Whether or not the UFC asks those questions, doping is not an excuse. Steroids and other drugs have long-lasting consequences. For me, there are 2 main reasons why doping is bad. 1, it's not safe, as many a person has either hurt themselves or have lost their life in the name of doping. And 2, it's not fair that one person follows the rules while the other person starts doping and says, screw the system. This is something that the UFC simply needs to stop, because this doping problem has potential to become an epidemic. So that's the video, guys. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. Also, take a look at our Twitter and our Instagram page at FanEyeSports, and don't forget to check Facebook. That's Fan-I Sports on the Facebook. So until next time, peace and love.